welcome to another episode of Tesseract Talks, the place where we put the spotlight on tech trends, startups, and VCs. I'm your host, Marco, the founder and CEO of Tesseract Analytics, and it is my pleasure today to have Audrey Adaline as our guest. She's a product and security researcher at SquareX, industry first browser detection and response solution. Audrey, welcome. How are you?
Thanks, Marco. I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah, amazing. Perfect sunny weather here in London, so great to be here. So, in preparation for the episode, I went through your newly published The Browser Security Field Manual, which I thought was really interesting. But before we dig into the topic, why don't we start by you telling us about your career background and the journey, how you went from investment positions at BCG, Sequoia, to then product and security researcher at SquareX.
Yeah, of course. As you've seen, I have a pretty unconventional background for cyber. I actually started in biochemistry. So I've always been fascinated by research, bleeding edge techniques and things like that in various different fields. But when I graduated, I wanted to figure out what I wanted to do as a career. And I felt like consulting was a great place to start. So that's how I ended up in Boston Consulting Group. There, I quickly got recruited to their private equity team, which I think really set me up well when Sequoia had reached out. So at Sequoia, that was when I was reintroduced to cybersecurity. And kind of a funny tidbit, my dad was actually an MSSP. So cyber is something I've been familiar with, but it was the one thing I didn't want to do because I didn't want to be too similar to my dad, but it's funny how things played out. So Sequoia was really the time when I got reintroduced to cyber, and given my science background, I was doing a lot of the deep tech investments there. And got to look at a lot of the best products in the cybersecurity industry. And to be honest with you, why I decided to join SquareX, it wasn't necessarily because I hell bent on a career in cyber. I think the love of cyber came later. It was very much because I felt like the problem that SquareX was solving was really interesting, really liked the team. And I think over time, I myself has started to see the charm of cyber itself as well.
Great, kind of like a circle going back to family business almost.
Absolutely. It's not expected at all, I promise.
So tell us more about SquareX. What is the security challenge you're trying to solve, and what value are you bringing to the users?
Yeah, so if you look at the modern workforce, we're really going through quite a bit of a shift in the way we work. So if you compare, the modern workforce compared to, let's say, 20 years ago, we're really spending a lot more time in the browser. The browser has essentially become a new endpoint, right? If you think about where we spend our time in our devices, more than 80% of the time is spent in the browser. So your local apps has become SaaS apps, apps like Office 365, which all used to be desktop apps, now all have SaaS versions. Similarly, local storage are becoming cloud storage. I think we barely download files anymore. And similarly, your identity now is mostly in the browser, whether that's your personal identity or work identity. And as a result, the browser is really becoming the new endpoint where the treasures of an enterprise is being stored and accessed. I think I read somewhere in a Gartner report that more than 60% of an enterprise data is now being stored in the cloud and accessed through the browser. And this really makes the browser a super attractive target to attackers, right? So recently we've seen a lot of breaches like the Cyber Haven breach, Midnight Blizzard RDP file attack. All of these originate in the browser, and many of them never leave them, right? So if you take a look, like let's say browser extensions, it never really involves any local files and processes. So it really just lives and dies in the browser. And in fact, the browser has really become the single most common initial access point for most modern day attack targeting employees. And you might be thinking, but what about existing solutions like EDR, SASE, and SSE? And to be honest, I think the key thing to note there is a lot of these solutions are invented way after the browser became as complex as it is today. So many of the newer features of the browser that enable a lot of the application layer attacks today go undetected and unmonitored by these tools. And I'm happy to share some of the limitations in detail, but that's really the gap that SquareX is trying to plug. So we deploy as a simple browser extension, and we can turn any browser, whether that's Chrome, Safari, Firefox, into a secure enterprise browser. So we're compatible with all browsers, operating systems, devices, including unmanaged device, by the way. So you can really think of us as an EDR in the browser that helps detect, mitigate, and threat hunt web attacks. in the browser. And we also support things like browser DLP. And if you, let's say, have employees that are BYOD or contractors, we can also help you have secure access to apps, internal apps through the browser.
Very interesting. And can you explain how is SquareX different from, let's say, an enterprise?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So I think enterprise browsers were sort of the first approach to solving browser security. So we've actually spoken to a lot of customers that in fact came to us because they recognized the problem of browser security, but the only tool they were exposed to were enterprise browsers. And some of the key issues that people have faced, and maybe let's first talk about the use cases, right? Most of the use cases people use enterprise browsers for are things like VDI replacement, contractor access management. So it's really on the secure app access side. And primarily the reason is we've learned from a lot of the customers we speak to that it's really hard to deploy an enterprise browser. So if you think about the deployment process, what you have to do is you basically have to remove all existing browsers, tell all your users that, hey, you can no longer use Chrome, you can no longer use Safari, you need to use this specific dedicated browser. There's usually a lot of resistance and change management that's involved. And of course, it also impacts your user experience. If you have all your workstations set up in the browser, this really impacts your productivity because some of the tools that you use might no longer be compatible. And I think another topic that is less discussed is actually the security risk of using an enterprise browser. Similar to how we had the CrowdStrike outage last year, moving your entire enterprise workflow to one app is really putting it as a single point of failure. So imagine your enterprise browser now shuts down. So you don't have any other browsers that are set up. You can't do work at all. Whereas for SquareX, because we come as an extension approach, first of all, super easy to deploy, compatible with everything, no change in user experience. If worst comes to worst, something does happen to SquareX, you can just easily disable it and allow users to continue to do their work. And I think the last point is that most browsers, enterprise browsers, are really just a fork of Chromium. And what that means is whenever Chromium updates and has a security patch, they would have to make sure that they create an update that's compatible with that patch. And usually it takes a couple of days. And during those days, all their customers would be open to zero-day attacks.
These are some considerations that I guess every enterprise has to bear in mind before they make that decision. You recently published the Browser Security Field Manual. Tell us what was the motivation behind writing it, and let's say what are the 3 key takeaways?
Yeah, absolutely. So at SquareX, in addition to building product, we spend a lot of time doing attack research. So we believe that the best defense is to understand how offense works. So we've been publishing a lot of zero-day attacks and researching a lot of existing initial access lateral movement techniques. And I think what we realize is unlike, let's say, endpoint security or cloud security, where there's a lot of resources out there, browser security is still relatively new. So even when I was doing the research to write this book, there isn't a lot of structured resources out there, but because we've done so much good work in this space, we just had an internal idea on why don't we put this together as a book, as a guide, not necessarily on trends or anything like that, but very much focused on the TTPs that attackers are using to create, a structured way for people to understand. And one of the things that we really hear from our customers is often when it comes to browser-based attacks, it's really challenging to figure out after the fact what exactly happened. And there's a couple of reasons to this, right? First, people don't have the security tools that are browser native to monitor exactly what happened. But the second thing is, if you think about, let's say, take a phishing site, for example, once the attack happens, attackers often just remove it. So even if you have the URL cache, you go there and you can't access, and you don't really know what really happened to the user. And as a result, there's very little information, very little demos out there that really explain what are the threats, how they work. And so we really want this book to be, a practical guide, especially because we think that the trend of, more and more employee activity and as a result attacks are going to browsers, that probably won't change in the near future. I think it's very important. The sooner we get educated as an industry, whether it's through SquareX or through other resources, I think that will put us in a much better place. So coming back to your question on sort of what are the three key takeaways, I would say, the first one is for people to start taking a look at their stack and seeing what are the key gaps when it comes to browser security. So we put up a website called browser.security where we put up some 25 attacks for you guys to try out. We had released this in DEF CON last year, showing that it bypasses all major SASTs and SSC in your Gartner quadrant. So I think that would be the first actionable action to just see, your posture, your web security posture assessment. I think the second one is please go ahead and read the book, take a look at the different techniques, the TTPs that attackers are using. And I think number 3, once you have a better understanding, start considering, a browser security solution that's really browser native, right? Don't rely on solutions that are using network traffic or browser APIs to infer what's going on. Really find someone who truly understands what's happening on the client side.
Okay, great. And can we find it on your website, or how can people that are interested to get it, where should they go?
Yeah, so there's a form on our website that you can fill in and we can send you more information on how to get the book. We also did so our first book launch was done in RSA. We're going to do a second book launch in DEF CON Black Hat. So if you're attending that, please definitely come and say hi in the bookstore. Also feel free to add me on LinkedIn. More than happy to share, some copies with you as well.
I mean, great stuff. And also makes me worried a bit because in terms of my browser, so now I have to rethink a lot of things. But you're also a member of Women in Security and Privacy Organization. Can you tell us a bit more about that? What kind of projects and initiatives are you doing there?
Yeah, absolutely. So WISP is one of the first communities out there that's supporting women in both security and privacy. So what we really think is, look, cyber is interesting because we're at war with people or adversaries that know no rules, right? So we need all the help we can. Cyber, including for myself, outside in it looks very intimidating, but really I think there's a lot of opportunities for all types of skill sets. I think cyber, surprisingly, after entering this space, I realized a lot of people come from, super varied backgrounds. So I think what WISP is trying to do is really trying to break that barrier, break that fear, or sort of demystify cybersecurity and privacy. So we have a lot of different initiatives. We think one of the best ways to get people in is exactly that, right? Education and kind of exposure. And so we've done a lot of scholarship programs. I believe last year we sponsored over 400 students to go to Black Hat, DEF CON. We also have a lot of webinars, events, both in person and local events, in-person events as well, and webinars as well on, let's say inviting CISOs to talk about their journey, let's say security researchers to talk about, what sort of attacks they're seeing. And we also have a lot of hands-on events as well. So we have a lockpicking workshop, CFP open mics, and mentoring program. So I would say there's a bit of everything for everyone. And our goal is really to make everyone comfortable, whether it's someone who's just considering entering cyber or privacy or someone who's already a leader. So we really see quite a mix when it comes to the community at WISP.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Audrey, for coming to the show, sharing your story and valuable insights. That was all for today, and I hope we will catch up in future, either on another episode or perhaps in London or at one of the security events. But thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you. So
Absolutely.
wishing you and our audience all the best, and stay cyber safe, everyone. Until next episode.
Thank you so much,
Bye.
Mark.